I am Dr. Angela Bolte, and I would like to welcome you to the PUBANS Artist in Residence Showcase. We're going to get started in just a moment. Just going to wait maybe a tiny bit to see if we have any latecomers, and then I'm going to hit record and we will start, okay? All right, let's go ahead and get started today. Again, I'm Dr. Angela Bolte, and it is very much my pleasure to introduce the Artist in Residence Showcase. It is my pleasure to be able to work with these students over an entire academic year as each one works on their individual projects with their faculty mentors. We meet about twice a semester to talk about their projects and just get a sense of how they're progressing and to make sure that they stay on track so that they're able to present a great showcase here in April. Now, the Artist in Residence program is named the PUBANS Artist in Residence program for our founding dean of the Honors College, Dr. Jerry PUBANS. My friend Jerry worked very hard to make the Artist in Residence program, and in appreciation of all his work for honors, this program has been dedicated for him, this Artist in Residence program. So what I want to do is I just want to get ahead and get started. I'm going to guess that we're going to run about 90 minutes tonight with our presentations. We will have some time at the very end to ask questions to the artists in residence. Now, I do want to warn you, some of our artists are 7 hours ahead, so they need to go to bed after they do their presentation, and a few of them do have class, so not everyone will be around toward the very end, but most of them will be, so you can ask questions then at that time, okay? All right, so our very first presenter of the evening is Elena Nielsen. And she is speaking on the playgrounds of dance and exploration into dance as a social tool. So I'm going to turn it over to her now.
Hi, my name is Elena or El Nielsen. My pronouns are they, them, and as Dr. Bolte introduced, I will be presenting on playgrounds of dance and exploration into dance as a social tool. I would like to begin by showing you this picture of someone who I interviewed, Arden Flint. They're here in the Zoom right now. And this is 3 different pictures of them in different dance environments. And with this, I'd like us to remember the quote, "The power of language relies on its reality creating capacity." Throughout this presentation, I'm going to mention dance as a language, something with a codified vocabulary that is a way of communication and of creating communication. When we see dance, we create realities around what we are seeing, and we create social realities when we participate in it, both dancing and as audience. So let's keep that in mind throughout this presentation. This is a little bit about my contents. I'll go through the methods, some of the people I interviewed, a little bit of the history, a little bit of the current applications, and then a little bit of dance as a language and thus its semiotics. So I thought that my final product would be a big video or documentary. However, as many researchers find out, I'm sure, the end product that we envision is not necessarily what we're going to get. So I have this, which is different, but a lot of my interviewers didn't want to be videoed, or with COVID, it was simply difficult to have in-person interviews. However, I still began to realize patterns, and from those patterns, I researched a little bit more into dance and applied linguistics to compile research and explain a little bit these patterns I saw. And I will be presenting a little bit of my findings today, of course, not as much as I'd like to, but here, performance personified. These are 4 of the people I interviewed: Arden Flint, Fema Safo, Celeste Johnson, and Vladimira Zdenekova, who is a Czechian person I actually interviewed here in Finland. So research finding highlights from these interviews are Celeste, who actually interestingly uses Instagram as a platform to promote joyful dance through sharing her own dance, but also through inviting others to share their dance on that platform. Fema, who is a drag queen, however, they were assigned female at birth and thus often find tension in a community which is often defined as mainly of cis gay men. Arden is a professional dancer who performs in a variety of spaces and views dance as a language and a way to communicate and create story and legend. And Vladimira is a former street dancer from Czechia who, as she grew older, was pushed into a dichotomy of dance, either choosing it as a career or having to abandon it. And she ended up choosing to go in a different way and now primarily engages with dance only through social media and at parties. So a little bit about the history, which I find very interesting. And if you do too, you can look into this on your own. But first, the inception of ballet. This is a way that dance has been used as a highly exclusionary social tool in history. As we can see, dance of ballet was appropriated from peasant culture by Louis XIV, who's the Sun King. He brought it to his court exclusively for high-bred men. So it was done in heels in a very upright way, and it included a lot of prior training that had to be done. So it stratified society in a new way by creating a new elite class of men who knew this dance. However, when ballet was brought to women, it became stigmatized and often synonymous with prostitution, as there was a huge system of patronage of wealthy people and ballet dancers. This stigma still goes on today and is most seen in the stereotype of men who do ballet now being seen as having to be gay because of the overwhelming concept that ballet is a thing for women, specifically for people who enjoy the company of men. The beginnings of hip hop is kind of the opposite of that. Instead of dance as an exclusionary tool and a way to create society and create sects in society, this is the way that dance was used to create community and social unity. So it stemmed from a very difficult situation in the Bronx, where a community was being very oppressed and needed a place to show physical catharsis and physical release. DJ Kool Herc and his sister Cindy Campbell threw a party where they mixed different cultural beats from their parents. And this is where the first break moves appeared. And if you look at the first break moves, they look a lot like violence because it was a way to show physical catharsis and that physical release without having to actually be violent. It was a way of social release, and then it spread throughout other parts of the United States, mainly in minority communities where there was a want for expression and also for that physical release. So a little bit of modern applications. Of course, I'm sure many of you have heard of TikTok, and this is the primary modern application I'll be talking about, but know that I'm also speaking on social media as a whole. TikTok is a way that we can see dance going viral. And in my mind, dance has always been going viral. As with hip hop, it started in one place and it quickly spread. However, with TikTok, it happens on a larger scale and a more inclusive scale than ever before. Older people, younger people, people from all around the world see each other dancing. And this creates a new vocabulary of dance, if we go back to that thinking of dance as a language. And it creates new words, which is what we can think of as the moves, and new dialects or genres. And it contributes to dance in a new way. However, there's often a feeling of it losing finesse or nuance when it goes to a larger, broader community of people who aren't necessarily trained. However, I would like to propose thinking of dance and of TikTok especially as these social media phenomenons as a global language of dance. For example, in recent years, English has been used as a global language between many people to communicate on a similar basis, to communicate ideas and knowledge that could not have been shared before. If we think as TikTok itself as a global language, it is not an end destination, but rather a place where people can communicate and create new vocabularies in ways they never have been able to before. It is a medium that people can use. Now, if we go back to our interviews to think a little bit about more as dance as a tool of inclusion and as a language, then we can see Celeste using dance as a tool of communication and of inclusion in a translanguaging space. So translanguaging is when you switch between languages, when you include a multitude of languages, when you approach languages without rules. Fema, our drag queen, has experienced exclusion in the dance and performance world based on perceived dance ideologies, or who we see to be dancers and who not to be, or in this case, who has the authority to be a drag queen and who doesn't. If we look at Arden's experience, we see the use of social media to create multilingual dance communities. And if we look at Vladimira, we see an often recognized phenomenon in language of erasure, where multilingual or single language identities are erased. However, we can take back the power of defining dance ideologies and dance identities to create more vocabulary and more community in dance. Our takeaway from this presentation, what I would love for people to take away is that dance truly has power to create realities. As we've seen in history, through ballet and through hip hop, it can include or exclude and create an in-group and an out-group and markedness. As we see now, it creates vocabulary and new ways of communication between people who never would be able to before. And as we see through our individual examples, it affects individual lives in ways that we are unaware of most of the time. It shapes our social scenes and how people are seen. And if we remember that dance is a language and that we can use that language for good, then we can use it in a better way than ever before. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elle. And please give appreciation to Elle, throw up your emojis and in the chat, but please stay muted at this time. Okay? At the very end, we can unmute, but not now. All right, I'm going to go right to our second presenter for the evening, Ethan McKellar, and Ethan is going to present on means of production. Ethan, take it away.
Yes. Let me share. Guess I can just do that. Is that showing? I guess. All right. Hi, my name is Ethan McKellar. I'm a senior with the CVPA, studying studio art and sculpture and ceramics, and everything that. So this has been a culmination of 4 years of work, 2 years of that mostly focusing on ceramics, and this is my project called Functional or Means of Production, and just going to get into it. This entire project is a introspective of production pottery, aimed at studying how functional pottery is made in the state of North Carolina, as well as in traditional and contemporary settings, and trying to get a better understanding of how ceramics is made and how it can be adapted into traditional and contemporary works of today. To break down this process, I'm going to have to explain about how I get from point A to point B. And that involves a number of steps. And the first one is math. So to begin everything, I had to calculate and formulate from scratch, as that's what production pottery calls for. The beginning of everything starts with a little bit of math and chemistry to understand how to get to the next step, which is experimentation. So on the left-hand side, you'll see a bunch of math, and that's how a number of glazes are made. And that's glaze bases and then the coloration that comes from them, and then everything that builds out from it. And then making the test tiles and seeing how things come out from the atmosphere and the such. And then the next process would be the application of glaze to the bodies of work and see how things come out. And the final bit, which is firing. One of the biggest parts of this whole project was to understand the basics of firing and the procedures that it undertakes, as well as things in ceramics can be highly volatile depending on how well procedure is followed, and to make sure that we are reacting properly or responding properly to the overall reactions from the kiln. At the beginning of this project, I was going to only do an oxidation firing, which would have just used an automated setting on an electric kiln. I opted to go towards a more traditional aspect of ceramic production, and that was to go towards gas reduction. Gas reduction allows for more options in glazing, as well as to find new paths in ceramics in general. And to see that was in the first results. and then to go into a series of development and refinement. The first results I yielded from this project was to see the different ways that it reacts with different bodies and to understand a bit more about what glazes are, how they can react with consumer, and how we develop from it. And one of the first processes was to look at more traditional glazes and how they apply, as well as looking at glazes that I've already formulated and see if they work and if it, or what the differences are in the surface quality, and to take an underlook of, is this going to be applicable to a consumer? Is it going to do the things that I'm wanting it to do, and et cetera, et cetera. The second part of this whole experiment came down to my understanding of clay and finding a way to narrow things down so that I get the best result possible and I can create a number of works. At the beginning, I used a clay body that had porcelain tendencies, which meant that the clay body was a little more difficult to use and it slowed down my production quite a bit. It would take me 10 or so minutes to work on a single pot at a time, which wasn't entirely conducive. However, as I went along, things did move a little faster. However, I decided that if I wanted to meet the production that I'm wanting to accomplish, I needed to change my clay body. And so I changed the calculation, included another clay that allowed it to be more firm and rigid, and it went to a more stoneware body, which is more typical that you find today. Yeah. And moving forward, I decided to keep working, and in the end, I ended up making upwards of 300 pieces in total, some of which have been sold or gifted to friends, family, and just trying to get their response and how people react to the works as well. However, whenever I forgot about this. Whenever working, I noticed that there was a bit of an evolution that was occurring with my work. Originally, I had looked at the work of Mark Hewitt, who was a very influential potter in the state of North Carolina, as well as the United States. I looked at his forms and vessels to get an understanding of where things can come from, as well as begin to evolve. However, like, I took this barrel body and then I turned it and I went towards an hourglass in order to try to give more shape and more volume inside the body. And then about a couple months ago, I was like, I needed to change the form. I felt like it wasn't entirely conducive and it was taking up a good amount of clay, and I can work in a faster production. So I went towards a combined feature, going with both in response to each other, and try to get a better form overall, and that is more identifiable as my own. And now to the final products. In total, like I said, I made upwards of 300 pieces of ceramic. Most of those were tests and failures. However, also looking at where successes came from and see how things applied. And sometimes this would tell me a bit more about how glaze interacts with the body, or how the glaze interacts with itself in a thinner or thicker application. The first glaze I'm going to look at is the Temoku. This is just this is a traditional glaze that originates from Japan, and in general is very satisfying. And when applied with its, like you might see in a few places where another glaze is also applied, and that was its glaze base, where it's like, this is a heavily iron based glaze where with no iron involved, it just comes out as white or reacts differently. And then pine green, this was a glaze that is more contemporary and was experimental with how it came out. And I noticed with interacting with other people, engaging with how people perceived it, beginning to understand a bit more about consumer perspectives, this glaze was way more like people engaged with it more because they found it more vibrant and more attractive to works. This was a volcanic sea was original, one of my original glazes, and then processed through. Okay, I'm just going to go a little bit faster through these. And Celadon, another traditional glaze. And cream, bases from creamware pottery. And that's it. All of these are, I have a bunch of different things, and they, everything stemmed from creating bowls, mugs, tumblers, plates, and so on and so forth. But yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Ethan. And yes, I have to say, I was always so impressed with how much he was able to produce. It was like literally shocking to me as someone who's done this for years and years. All right, I'm going to turn now to our next presenter, Crystal Zeballos, and she's going to speak on cultural reproduction. Crystal, take it away.
Just give me a second. I think I have it. Yeah. And it is. Oh, wait, I had to go to the beginning. Okay. All right, so let me just get this in order. My name is Crystal Zeballos, and I'm also in the BFA program. And for my project, I made a body of work in installation, cultural reproduction. And this highlights the visual reproduction interactions with cultural icons, animals, products in ceramic hand building, slip casting, and multimedia. First installed in the Greensboro downtown area, cultural reproduction invites viewers to engage with the interactive assemblage pieces. This installation allowed for a mix of illustrative and interactive installations that engage and settle my Western audience in a new perspective and experience with a recognizable religion and consumer behavior. With multi-sensory methods of display and interaction, the installation grows with each introduction, requiring an imprint from each viewer for its anointment, creating dedicated spaces for admiration and opportunities for self-reflection. My goal was to create a more authentic and conscious interaction with culture. Being of Bolivian ethnicity and sharing US nationality, my cultural identity and dual experiences became a main influence on my artistic concepts and aesthetics. I found myself engrossed in the exploration of both cultures and their expression through documentation and critique. Paired with social practice, I created a dedicated body of culturally conscious work centered in the indigenous identity and the demonstrative effect of touristic acculturation seen in the syncretic nature of Bolivian iconography and the market aesthetic, displaying the treatment of indigenous culture and animal native consumption as it has been and is practiced. My research began with an introspective look for my purpose of cultural work and why it should be shown. So what I first began researching was other forms of installation and how they did it. Such an installation was achieved by the artist Stacey L. Kirby, who installed the Bureau of Personal Belonging at UNCG's project space. This intensive and transformative installation created intentional roots and successions of actions for the viewer, activating an interpersonal dialogue on citizenship, identity, and human rights, designated through on-site volunteers and a curated office space. This installation required a multitude of mundane materials and backdrops to fill the space in order to properly embody the setting, which was further activated through Kirby's stations that took viewers through each room and real unique dialogue. My method of installation was also largely inspired by Jenny Fine's Synchronized Swimmers, a photo and multimedia installation that incorporated forms of installation, performance, storytelling, folklore, and regional cultural studies in an attempt to overlap the past with the present. Fine employs time as a material in an exploration of both personal and cultural memory, identity, and our shifting relationship to photo in our digital image-saturated age. While Fine's work was also a large inspiration for the style and materials that I used, another keystone piece was Felix Gonzalez Torres's various installations of his candy piles. Simply put, the work was installed to slowly deplete by incoming viewers, representing the depletion of the body that incurred on both his partner and his life by AIDS, using the candy as a metaphor for love and sharing burden. However, aside from being a visual demonstration of depletion and love, the act of consumption here, I believe, is also akin to both loss and eternity. Those who take the pieces will always live on in that person. And this mode of art making is unique and challenges the isolated way we see and interact with art. The element of and representation of the interaction becomes its own art and social connection. With these cornerstone theories in mind, I began to structure the show and the flow through the designated space. All right, let's see if this will play, hopefully. All right, so after securing a slot to install my work at the Greensboro Project Space, I aim to create a touristic environment and travel sequence that would communicate my themes of trade, syncretism, and Indigenous activism. I created a route and supplementary media to support the environment. So as you can see, like, your flight ticket, the whole baggage area claim, and then entering the space. I took the concept of the candy piles, and instead of taking from, I would add to the installation from each viewer. By both visual and kinetic connection, the installation would grow from each interaction, requiring an imprint from each viewer and its anointment, while driving a core message that is both engaging and vital for the viewer artwork relationship. My conceptual theme strove to decommoditize the artwork and be just as much as an experience as the documentation work that I was doing. The recreation of the market in the Ofrenda Selmish piece you see here is where viewers would participate and practice in the making of an ofrenda and walk through the space. This practice is done in Bolivia during the month of August, and that's the actual one from Bolivia that I brought over. So quite literally used very similar materials or same materials, moss, candies, and walnuts, and that's for rebirth and sacrifice to La Pachamama. And this is also where each viewer would pick out specific tiles based off of their wishes, goals, manifestations, things they were thankful of. So each interaction was also unique, and then adorned with some of the more typical offerings, so gold, silver, and incenses and spices from the countries that would be used. And then after they finished with their making of the ofrenda, they would follow me out from this part of the installation into the next room. I'll go ahead and go forward. And this next room takes syncretism into the next step. So we have the Andean icon, the Catholic Rosary, as a grounds for manifestation where everyone would place their ofrendas. And this is a combination of both Western and Indigenous iconography that reflects the characteristic syncretism of Bolivia from the colonial past. Another piece of this practice is done by entering the mines here. And this is an example from Jenny Fine's work using the tarp to create a space where they would also do a secondary practice of blessing the grounds and adding to the installation. Let's see. That's all we need from there. There you go. And so in my focus in slip casting and mold making and intensive underglaze and glaze testing, I found that both the product and process visually reflect the commodity of culture, rapid development, and mechanical reproduction. This relationship emerges in the touristic and handcrafted trade in Bolivia, reflected in my slip casted traditional instruments, handcrafted items that embody the voice and the indigenous and Bolivian craft makers. Through the use of color and some facial depiction, these group installed pieces identify the Bolivian voice while also criticizing the depreciation of mass-produced products over time and through cultural identity. And that's another shot of the market. And another thing about this piece that I found most people connected with a lot was sort of its relationship between the Andean figure, the Andean condor, which is the state bird, and the sort of placement of religious figures in Western culture, mainly the crucifixion of Christ. Same thing with the mine. So just to go into this a little further, this reflects the sort of dangerous practice done in Bolivia. Mining used to be done for silver in the colonial past and is now done for lithium. So it is still a transitory element done between developing nations and first world nations. And then with the economical narratives between developing and developed and developing countries, there's also a relationship between indigenous and animal activist movements and a struggle between industrialism and traditionalism. My animal compositions accentuate parallels in animal sacrifice and dehabitation to the economy and environment as a result of intruding industrialism on the native population. These amalgamations and interactive presentations serve as embodiments of the traditional and temporal rituals of prayer and manifestation. These gestures of my installation work highlight the value of art as a service for teaching, introspection, and creative placemaking, as well as trying to create just a better, authentic understanding of culture and how we treat and appreciate it. And that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Crystal. All right, so our next presenter that we have this evening is Krista Savage White, and she is presenting on Youth, a collection of bilingual children's stories. Krista, take it away.
Good evening, everybody. I am Krista Savage White, and this project for my artist in residence is my bilingual stories collection. It's a collection of 6 stories that strives to promote bilingualism, diversity, and try to do all that without tokenism, which I hope to develop into illustrations very soon by working with an illustrator. So today I'm going to read one of my stories called Sweetened with Honey. And this one's a bilingual one with English and Spanish. And for this one, I'm going to read in Spanish and then English and alternate as the passage goes on. Ready? La miel, el alimento de las abejas. Y la miel también es el ingrediente secreto de los mejores platos del mundo. Honey, the element of bees. And honey, also the secret ingredient for the world's best dishes. En el restaurante Salazar, Yamilet es la persona que hace todas las tareas de la familia. Pasa sus días cocinando comida, tomando pedidos y recogiendo frutas del huerto Salazar. At the Salazar restaurant, Yamilet is the family's multitasker. She spends her days cooking meals, taking orders, and picking fruits from the Salazar orchard. Pero su pasión es ser una apicultora y unir a la gente con la fuerza de miel. But her passion is being a beekeeper who believes in uniting folks with the power of honey. Ok, abejas, es hora de extraer la miel de las colmenas, aunque no todas, no puedo dejarles morir de hambre. Okay, bees, it's time to extract the honey from the hives. Not all of them, though. I can't let y'all starve to death. A las abejas les encanta Yamilet, y a Yamilet le encantan las abejas. El colmenar es su santuario y está rodeado por el huerto, los dragones, las calendulas, y las zinnias. The bees love Yamilet, and Yamilet loves the bees. The apiary is her sanctuary and is surrounded by the orchards, snapdragons, marigolds, and zinnias. En la cocina, Yamilet talla los panales. Entonces los corta en trozos, los mezcla en un líquido y filtra la miel en un jarra. In the kitchen, Yamilet carves out the honeycombs. Then she cuts them into chunks, stirs them into a liquid, and filters the honey into a jar. Bueno, es hora de hacer algo de magia. Alrighty, time to make some magic happen. En cuanto sale de la cocina, los clientes empiezan a gritar, Yamilet, quiero mi té endulzado con miel, gritó un cliente. Sí, también quiero mi bistec endulzado con miel. As soon as she walks out of the kitchen, customers start yelling, Yamilet, I want my tea sweetened with honey, yelled one customer. Yeah, I want my steak sweetened with honey too. Todo el aborto crea confusión por varios segundos. Les oigo, ustedes tienen suerte, porque acabo de hacer una jarra fresca de miel directamente del panal. Sí, los clientes aplaudían. All the commotion brought her confusion for several seconds. I hear you all. You are in luck because I just made a fresh jar of honey straight from the honeycomb. Yeah! Customers applauded. Ahora, ¿quién quiere su plato endulzado con miel? Sí, cariño, ven acá. Now, who wants their meal sweetened with honey? Yes, honey, come here. Con un gesto de su palito mielero, la dulzura viscosa y vívida de la miel realza cualquier plato que toca. Las alitas de pollo, el bistec, los pasteles de 3 leches, Cualquier cosa se combina con miel, menos una cosa. With the wave of her honey dipper, the viscous, vivid sweetness of the honey enhances any dish it touches. Chicken wings, steak, tres leches cakes, anything goes with honey, except for one thing. Yamilet, olvidaste endulzar con miel los guisantes de mi bebé, dijo una cliente. Yamilet se rió entre dientes y dio palmaditas en la cabeza de la bebé. Esta bebé solo tiene varios meses, ¿verdad? Sí, ¿por qué? Yamilet, you forgot to sweeten my baby's peas with honey, a customer said. Yamilet chuckled and patted the baby's head. This baby is only several months old, right? Yeah, why? Nunca se da miel a los bebés de menos de un año de edad, porque puede provocarles botulismo, lo cual podría causar muerte. No querrías que haga algo así. ¿Querrías? Tiene que esperar hasta que cumpla un año para probar la miel por primera vez. I never give honey to babies less than 1 year old because it can give them botulism, which may cause death. You wouldn't want me to do something like that, would you? She'll have to wait until she turns 1 to have her first taste of honey. Mi bebé cumple un año hoy, gritó un cliente diferente. Oh, feliz cumpleaños. Déjame preguntar sobre el pastel. Ya está preparado, dijo su hermana Marcela. My baby turns 1 today, a different customer yelled. Oh, happy birthday. Let me go ask about the cake. It's already made, said her sister Marcela. Fantástico. Entonces, déjame usar este palito mielero. Mira en ese líquido dorado y déjalo empapar en ese pastel delicioso. Fantastic. Then let me use this honey dipper. Look at that gold liquid and let it soak into that delicious cake. Todos en el lugar se quedaron mirando con asombro. ¡Wow! Es como magia. En mi cumpleaños quiero un pastel así. La chica de miel lo ha hecho otra vez. Allí está. ¡Feliz cumpleaños! Todos aplauden y la bebé se come el pastel con las manos. Everyone in the room stared in awe. Wow, it's like magic. I want a cake like that on my birthday. The honey girl has done it again. There you are. Happy birthday. Everyone applauds and the baby eats the cake with her hands. En el restaurante Salazar, todo es mejor endulzado con miel. Aunque tan sencillo, es la razón por la que es el mejor restaurante del pueblo. A los clientes les encanta Yamilet y los habitantes la llaman su chica de miel debido a su encanto y conocimiento del líquido dorado dulce. Al mantenerse unidos, todos son más fuertes y todos se mantienen unidos cuando sus almas estén endulzados con miel. At the Salazar restaurant, everything is better sweetened with honey. Although so simple, it's the reason why it is the best restaurant in town. Customers love Yamilet, and the townspeople call her their honey girl due to her charm and knowledge of the sweet golden liquid. Through sticking with one another, everyone's stronger, and everyone sticks together when their souls are sweetened with honey. That's the end of the story, and that one was really good to me because with a lot of these stories, they come with my imagination. I go with wherever my imagination takes me, and I look forward to turning this into an illustrated children's book and publishing them in the future, because this one's going to be a stereotype for now, but mass production to be coming in the future in some other date, but it'll happen one day.
All right, thank you so much, Krista, especially for giving my undergraduate Spanish a workout. All right, so our next presenter is Will Nichols, and Will is going to present on examining the saxophone, how the saxophone has impacted music in the last 175 years. I'm going to turn it over to you now, Will.
Good evening, folks. It's exciting to be here, especially it's a change of pace. I've been student teaching this semester, and getting back into this side of academia has been refreshing thus far into the meeting. I've really enjoyed getting to see these other projects, especially the finished products. As Dr. Bolte mentioned, my project was on the saxophone. I've been playing the saxophone since I was 12 years old, which is it's almost half of my life at this point. and I came and I studied music education at UNCG. I'm supposed to graduate in a couple weeks now, or about a month actually. Yeah, a month. And while I was studying music education, at UNCG, you also have to study instrument proficiency, and saxophone was my instrument. This research project culminated as not only my artist in residence project, it was also my senior honors project to complete the requirements for disciplinary honors. And it also fulfilled my degree requirement as my degree recital. This project included a research paper that numbered in pages more than, I want to say 15. Off the top of my head, it was really fun. I got to explore a lot of resources and listen to a lot of saxophone music. But in addition to this paper that I synthesized, I also delivered a recital that utilized information from that paper as a lecture recital. I gave that recital on November 29th, and I'm going to share with you one of the pieces of music from that. This is a piece of music by Jean-Baptiste Saint-Gelais. Saint-Gelais was one of the very first composers for the saxophone. He started writing for the instrument a couple years after Adolphe Sax invented it in the 1840s. This piece was written sometime in the 1870s. Saint-Gelais wrote well over 30 pieces for the saxophone. He's also credited with writing the very first saxophone quartet. And this is his opus number 78, his concertino, which means small concerto. All right, so that was again Jean-Baptiste Saint-Gelais' opus number 78, his concertino. That is a pretty, that is a pretty definite example of the type of music that it was characteristic of that time in the second half of the 19th century. That time, especially in France, music was centered around being very showmanship like, and it was all about displaying your virtuosity as a performer. But in addition to showing your virtuosity as a performer, the pieces were also centered at showing off how well the composer could write for those instruments. And considering that the saxophone was brand new at this point, hadn't even been around for 30 years by the time this was written, it was an impressive feat for somebody to play this in that time period where it was written, when it was written. Music written around this time for saxophone would have been performed at the Paris Conservatory of Music, the main one. There's actually more than one Paris Conservatory of Music, which is just confusing to me, at least. But the music written by Jean-Baptiste Saint-Gelais, and then also composers such as Jules de Marseman, would have been performed at the Paris Conservatory as the exit examination, if you will, for the conservatory. It's what you would perform on your instrument to verify, kind of like a senior recital, but it was more of a competition between the students at the conservatory. Every year, the conservatory would essentially commission these works for every instrument from different composers in France, and performers would receive the music about a month in advance. And then on the date of the examination, every student would have the opportunity to perform it. And the student who did the best would win the examination. And then they would be granted their diploma to graduate and move on with everything else. Performers could win the solo de concours, that's what it's called, which means competition solo or competition of solos. And then they would move on with their life and get jobs in other orchestras. So that's just one example of the music that I performed on the recital. So is that my time, Dr. Bolte?
You have a little bit more if you need it, but yes.
I don't really need it. So thank you for listening to me and my saxophone playing.
Thank you so much, Will. Yes, Will has given it away. When I pop up, they have 1 minute left. So I terrify them when I show up because of that reason. All right. Our next presenter today is Allison Creeder, and she is going to speak on the diversifying the classical music canon. Allie, take it away.
Hi, everyone. My name is Allie Kreider. I am a senior flute performance major at UNCG. Let me pull up my thing real quick. Sorry, technical difficulties. Okay. Okay, so diversifying the classical music canon. So a little background information. My Zoom thing. Okay, sorry. The classical music canon consists of foundational works worthy of being studied and learned, the majority of which are composed by white, deceased Western European men. If I were to ask you to name composers off the top of your head, I'm sure many of you would say Mozart, Beethoven, Debussy, but I think it would be challenging to name a female composer or a composer of color off the top of your head. So it is essential as a 21st century musician to promote diversity and inclusivity in the music we decide to program and play in recitals and concerts. So as the world continues to evolve, the music we play, program, and listen to shall also evolve with us. And it is time to break the cycle of routinely programming music that is considered standard and introduce works by living, female, and BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color composers into the classical music canon. So for my project, it was my initiative to perform a recital of works solely written by underrepresented composers. I want to champion these composers and their pieces by professionally recording them and uploading them to several social media platforms. As musicians, social media and accessible recordings are vital in order to make our own interpretation of the music. And many of these pieces on my program don't have recordings online anywhere. And then it is important to showcase and encourage others that diversifying our repertoire allows new voices that had been historically underrepresented to finally be heard. So here's my program. I will be playing with Dr. Suzanne Pollock, and it is April 24th, Sunday, 1:30 p.m. in the Organ Hall. So the first piece is An Evolving Romance by Geoffrey Mumford, The Pied Piper of Harlem by Adolphus C. Hailstork, Three Bagatellas from China West by Chen Yi, This Floating World by Edie Hill, and Little Tango Piece by Adriana Isabel Figueroa Mañas. So a little bit about each of these composers. Geoffrey Mumford, who wrote An Evolving Romance, originally from Washington, D.C., Mumford has received numerous fellowships, grants, awards, and commissions to write music. He is currently teaching composition at Lorain County Community College in Northern Ohio. Chen Yi, who wrote Three Bagatellas from China West, originally from China. Yi is a composer and violinist who currently lives in Kansas City, Missouri, and teaches composition at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. She was the first Chinese woman to receive a Master's of Arts in Music Composition from the Central Conservatory of Music in Beijing. Edie Hill, who wrote This Floating World, currently resides in Minnesota, where she continues to compose and freelance regularly. And I got this quote from her personal website. She wrote, "Writing music is always an opportunity to research, learn, use, reach down deep, and allow inspiration to come from the stuff of life." And next we have Adolphus C. Hailstork, who wrote The Pied Piper of Harlem. A native of New York, he currently resides in Virginia Beach and is professor of music and eminent scholar at Old Dominion University. And Adriana Mañas currently resides in Mendoza, Argentina, and continues to compose and perform regularly. So this is a video of me playing the Pied Piper of Harlem, the second movement, With a Twinkle in His Eye, and the third movement, Get on Board the A Train, Lil Chillin'. I need to share my sound. There we go. Oh, sorry. Okay, that was it.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Allie. All right, so our next presenter is Hannah Grace Ward, and Hannah is going to speak on The Shoemaker.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Hannah Ward, and my project is a creative writing piece titled The Shoemaker. The Shoemaker is a retelling of the classic Cinderella story, which pulls elements from fairy tales around the world and combines them with modern concepts of feminism and the questioning of social structures. With support from my mentor, Professor Jessie Von Reenen, I was able to research the basic structure of fairy tales around the world, and while drawing from my own experiences with these tales, was able to identify a few common themes to structure my own story around. The Shoemaker follows Amelia, a Cinderella-like character whose life has always been ordinary. She cares for her ailing father alone and throws herself into her work as a small-town shoemaker in the hopes that she'll soon be able to afford to travel and get her father the medical attention he needs. Amelia doesn't believe anything in her life will ever change until a mysterious stranger walks into her shop and offers her a deal she can't refuse. The terms are clear. Amelia must attend 3 balls being held in the royal court of Glysaria. But when Amelia's simple life as a shoemaker gets overturned, will Amelia become queen, or will she lose much more than just her shoes? My inspiration for this project was my own experience with fairy tales. As a child, I read lots of fairy tales, and they often contributed to how I saw myself. However, one common theme among these tales that I identified was the nature of the passive feminine protagonist. Female identifying characters in these tales were often not given much agency to create change in their lives and were instead forced to rely on miracles or magic provided by other characters. I felt like I identified with many of these protagonists, but it was disheartening to see how many of them relied on others to achieve their happily ever after. This led me to the 2 most important components of my own twisted tale: an active protagonist and the removal of magic. Specifically, my protagonist, Amelia, has her own profession, and she's respected in this profession within the world of the story. While Amelia begins as more of a timid character who allows others to guide her life, the story deals with Amelia's personal journey as she begins to take her life into her own hands. My story also features a large female identifying cast of characters with their own ambitions and goals. Initially, my idea for this project was to develop a short novella based on my own fairy tale story. However, this project soon grew way beyond the scope of my proposal. While working with my mentor, other artists, and the supporters of my project, I was able to go beyond the writing part of creating my novella into exploring other aspects of publishing and design. So I'm going to share with you right now the cover that I designed for my own work. My work is titled The Shoemaker, and so I got the chance to really dive deep into what makes a cover as a representation of a work, usually somebody's first experience with a written work. So as you can see here, I have a few elements in my cover that are relevant to my story. We have a crown, which is a motif because I am dealing with a Cinderella retelling. However, we also have an antique wooden shoe form. So this is something that a shoemaker would have used to actually create and craft the shoes. And then the last motif that I really wanted included in my cover is the color green. For my version of the glass slippers in my story, green is a very prominent color. Just going back to some of the other things, beyond cover design, I was also able to explore typography and really how I wanted my work to appear on a printed page. And I am now in the process of learning to and working with bookbinding procedures. And I will actually be later this week hand binding my own copy of my text. One interesting thing just about bookbinding that I noticed is that a lot of the tools that you use in bookbinding are very similar to what's used in shoemaking. So in my own way, I get to experience a little bit of what Amelia does in her profession. In the future, I would like to pursue publishing representation for my work. Writing and publishing my own work is something I intend to continue doing in the future. And so the Artists in Residence program has been really beneficial in providing me with support and resources to explore this field. I intend to continue developing my story while looking into other opportunities to get my work into the world. I personally think that it's so important for young female identifying people to see a fantasy or fairy tale character that is very active in creating change within their own world and their own life. My story specifically focuses on defying the fairy tale conventions in order to critique the components of the tales that we tell younger generations and to remind readers that they can be the authors of their own happily ever afters. And now I would like to take a moment to read an excerpt from my own work. This is the scene that takes place as Amelia is preparing for the ball with the mysterious stranger, Garrett. Reaching behind the displays, he picked up a pair of shoes that were carefully hidden in the back. "What are these?" he asked. Garrett lifted a pair of sparkling emerald slippers. I rushed forward and snatched the shoes out of his hands, cradling them. "Nothing," I said. "I made these a few years ago, but they aren't anything we need." "They're perfect," Garrett argued. "They aren't even gold. Besides, they were an experiment, but they don't fit, not properly at least." The shoes had used small pieces of stained glass to appear like they were cut from emeralds. Unfortunately, the glass made them stiff, and they wouldn't mold to someone's feet in a way to fit properly. They were gorgeous, but not functional. Garrett took the shoes and knelt by my feet. He waited until I finally conceded and stuck out my foot for him to place them on. The shoes had been made for me, yet they were still a bit loose. I could walk, but that was likely it. "No dancing, remember?" Garrett said. And then we were off. One of the important things about this excerpt from my story and how it focuses into my vision of not having a passive protagonist is that my character Amelia actually creates and crafts her own glass slippers. However, I wanted to sort of play on the idea of the glass slippers as being this focusing element for the tale. So I decided personally to make them a bit of a barrier for the character. That will come in later into the story, exactly how that presents a barrier. But if you notice in the way that I wrote this excerpt, the shoes do not fit properly. They're very pretty, but not functional. And that is sort of my way of identifying this value that I see in fairy tales of pretty things or pretty people or magic that isn't functional, and sort of things that take away from the protagonist's own experience, comfort, and really agency. Thank you all so much for listening to my presentation. That is all I have, but I appreciate everyone supporting my journey in creating this project.
All right, thank you so much, Hannah. All right, so I'm going to go to our next presenter for the evening, Sydney Thompson, and she is going to speak on her project, And They Might Be Living Still. Sydney.
Thompson, and I would like to start with a fact about fairy tales. In fairy tales predating the versions chronicled by the Brothers Grimm, the beginning and the ends of these stories weren't exactly what we recall them. Rather than taking place once upon a time in a land far, far away, the stories took place not long ago, not far from here. And they didn't end happily ever after. They instead ended with an assurance that the protagonists are not far from where you are, and that they might be living still. Fantasy elements in the literary genre are an important tool to describe the full range of human experience. Storytelling is how we learn about the world and each other, with stories to explain why spring came and why the sky can erupt into thunder and lightning. In these types of stories, there's also this human element, a mirror held up to our own psyches that reflects the best and the worst humanity has to offer each other in the world. Specifically, fairy tales are an origin of how we use fantasy to address the problems we face and reflect hope back into it. Our current generation faces climate change, economic fallout of the Great Depression, and problems that can seem as hopeless as the difference between a prince and a pauper seemed in these medieval eras. In these fairy tales of the 21st century that I've written, a freshman has an encounter with the spirit of the dying wild after a party. A girl in the throes of depression sees a phoenix outside her window and is reborn. An economics major evaluates the worth of eternal life. And They Might Be Living Still is a collection of 7 interconnected short stories describing these encounters with these college students in the fantastic in an exploration of hope. So the concept of these short stories was inspired by an assignment I had in a creative writing class I took in my sophomore year for my minor. Now, I tend to prefer writing more fantastic and speculative genres because I enjoy how they can show off the full range of the human experience in a way that I think not many other literary conventions can. However, that's not really considered a literary genre for a lot of reasons, and that tends not to be what people would like for you to focus on in these classes. But it inspired me to try to experiment with a more literary style while keeping these fantastic elements that I really enjoyed writing. The result was a story called The Last Fairy Summer, which told the story of 2 girls who used to be friends, hunting for fairies in the park on the last night before both would go off to their college orientations. This story that I wrote had stuck with me even months after I'd written it, months after the class was done, because of the way that I had been able to use fairies and the whimsical experiences that these girls shared in order to discuss my own feelings about growing up and growing apart from friends that I had known, and the unique qualities of friendships girls have. And this led me to want to create an anthology of stories exploring this sort of crossover genre. And where better to cross over fantasy and literary than the fairy tale? In particular, there's the inspiration of these stories where peasants married royalty, where fortunes changed, and the world was not always as it was, but what it could be. And this idea also called into mind attitudes I had seen in my own peers and my own argument to those attitudes. This is the several characters and a lot of the heart of this anthology. In particular, a character named Marie, the protagonist of one of my short stories, The Vampire. And I would like to read what Marie thinks of the world out for you all, if you would not mind. Marie thought of the tragedies that had occurred within her own lifetime. The planet's decline turned to plummet. 9/11, the Great Recession, and the rise of fascism were all recent memories. She was only 23, and yet it felt like centuries had already passed in her time on Earth. She pictured her parents and their childhoods in the early 70s, and the trauma of witnessing the Vietnam War on their television screens, along with the oil crisis and the political fallout of Watergate. Her grandparents witnessed the start of the Cold War in an era of 7 minutes to midnight, all the ghosts of the world wars and the Great Depression. Everything came back around to the same conflicts, the same dark reflections of the human nature. I don't like seeing bad things either. Thomas rested his chin on a curled hand. But I find that for every act of horrific violence, every bit of cruelty, there is at least 10 times the courage, the kindness, the little acts of love. With this installation, this idea as the thesis of this project, I contacted Dr. Jessie Van Reenen and asked her to be my mentor and to help me refine and create this short story collection, to which she very graciously agreed. And I am very thankful for that. From there, we started with these visions of sorts, a scene, of these encounters, of these exact moments as iconic as Cinderella's own glass slippers of the Enchanted Rose. So with things such as a girl who was reaching out to her window to see the fiery phoenix, an ice sprite in the window on a cold winter's night, the meeting of the god in the aftermath of a party, a mermaid seen on spring break, a dialogue between 2 enigmatic characters on the point of living forever, and a violinist summoning an entity with the intent of being spirited away. I envisioned 7 characters, the number that is considered the most powerful in folklore and fairy tale, 7 heroes of sorts, of stories that deserve to be written. From there, derive the stories of these individuals, of these moments of this iconography, tying them into current attitudes and North Carolina folklore. And I created the fictional Hawthorne College, where all these characters' paths would meet and explore this universe where magic and the mundane coexisted. I went further to edit, refine, and develop these concepts through several drafts. And once we had 7 complete stories, that was when we began to consider making physical copies, as you can see here. So this is also produced by the print shop here at UNCG, and I worked to personally design it from the way it's laid out inside, and I took the photographs on the back and the front cover. What's interesting about them is that they were taken on UNCG's campus, partially to emphasize the themes of the collection, which is ultimately the mixing of what is now and what could be. So I really enjoyed working on this project a lot, and I am honored that the Honors College and the Poubons Artists in Residence program was able to support me and this project. And with that, I would like to invite you into one of my stories, The Spirit of the Mountain. You are a part of this fairy tale, for now you are a college student, having attended your first wild college party. And in the aftermath, you stumble through the dark to get home without being caught with something that you really should not have. You encounter a spirit of nature in this moment, a spirit of the mountain. It was there, in the wood, that you saw the spirit of the mountain. They were neither male nor female, with long hair that was green like the trees in the height of summer, overgrown with kudzu and wisteria. Their eyes were the color of stormy skies, their expression inscrutable as they regarded you. I brought a gift, you stammered, in sheer awe of the divine before you. You set the half-empty beer can someone pressed into your hand before you left down at the feet of the spirit. I have no need for gifts such as these. They spoke, and 1,000 voices rang out like the ones that rode the wind. The sentiment is appreciated, but what I require is more arduous. You frowned and kept your beer to yourself. What do you want then? The spirit smiled. It was as cold as the peak of the mountain in the winter, as warm as the sun on a perfect afternoon. Times have changed. The wild is dying, they said. This planet is dying. You remembered how it was in the news, how the planet had 12 years left or something like that. So you want me to recycle more then? It was almost underwhelming. The first time you'd come to know a spirit or a god, and they just wanted you to sort your paper and plastic better. Among other things, they said. Promise to respect this land, to watch over it, and to always keep it in mind in all that you do. Leave no trace of your presence in the wild. Never take more than you need and replenish what you can. Respect the balance and the role all living things have to play in maintaining this balance. If enough make this promise, the mountain can heal. They offered their hand to you. Is it a deal? It's a promise, you answered as you accepted without hesitation. A promise that you keep still. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sydney. What great, interesting stories you have there. All right, I'm going to our penultimate presenter, our second to last, Mary Neese. And Mary's going to talk about her Artist in Residence project, Beverly Hillbilly, Fat, Queer, and Pink in the Shadow of Appalachia. I'm going to turn it over to Mary now.
Everything showing okay? Yes. Is my slide up? I was just making sure. Okay.
Yes.
Cool. Good evening. My name is Mary Neese. I am a senior majoring in consumer apparel and retail studies with my concentration in apparel product design, which is a mouthful. So I usually just shorthand that to fashion design, and my personal specialty is plus size fashion, which has required a lot of additional work while in school. For this project, I designed and made a deeply personal size-inclusive fashion collection that is also my senior honors project for the disciplinary honors program. So a little bit of context for this. I grew up in a very conservative Southern evangelical family. My sexual identity and gender are kind of complicated for me to talk about, and I'm in the closet to most of my family. But the short of it is that I'm a bisexual and non-binary person and didn't really come to terms with that until adulthood. My dad's family is from East Tennessee and my mom's from Western North Carolina, so my Appalachian roots run deep. I've spent a good chunk of my time at UNCG examining the parts of my family and upbringing that are cultural things to find comfort in, and reconciling that with my religious deconstruction and growth into my queer identity. Around my freshman year at UNCG, I really fell in love with Western wear, and I appreciate the connection it brings me to my Tennessee family, who instilled in me my love of making things and country music. I spent my summer last year interning for Manuel Cuevas in Nashville, Tennessee. Known anonymously as Manuel, the 88-year-old designer was Nudie Cohn's head tailor from the 1950s to the 1970s, and is most well known for making Johnny Cash the Man in Black, dressing the singer through most of his career. You can see him pictured here with me and his longtime friend and client, Marty Stewart, in the picture in the top. I had the opportunity to learn traditional tailoring and Western wear techniques from a designer who played a key role in shaping our societal conception of what defines Western wear. And I was very excited to incorporate what I learned into my personal design sensibilities. You can see in the pictures here some of my past efforts designing and styling Western wear. So here is my mood board for this collection. My inspiration pulls heavily from Dolly Parton's style in the 1970s, Casey Musgrave's style during her golden hour era, and my general love of pink and the 70s by way of 90s Elle Woods aesthetic. Last year, I got really into ice dyeing fabric, which is a technique that uses ice to melt powdered dyes into fabric, creating marbled watercolor effects. This style of dyeing and the color theory involved plays really well with the colors I wanted to use for this collection. My signature pink, but paired with purple and pops of blue to represent bisexual pride colors. I spent last year showing versatility within my aesthetic for the sake of my portfolio, but for this collection, I wanted it to be unapologetically pink and unapologetically me. This first look was very much so an experiment. I had never worked with silk before, and I got this idea for a sheer silk robe with Western detailing and dramatic fringe. I also love wearing booty shorts over leggings, and I wanted to play with that styling and drafting a bodysuit in lieu of leggings. I was playing with a lot of styles I'd never drafted before and new to me materials, and I think the overall finished look is strange but successful. There is a significant amount of hand embroidery on the robe. I use silk thread on silk charmeuse applique to silk chiffon. When I've been stressed during school, my mantra has been the only way out is through, as in the only way to get through it is to finish what I started. And I thought that saying would pair really well with chain stitch rose and thorn embroidery, which is a traditional motif in a lot of Western wear. The only fabric I did not dye myself for this collection was the silk for the robe. The cotton jersey of the bodysuit and the denim of the shorts were both dyed by me. Here is also some of the art and tech flats I made for this look as part of an assignment for one of my classes. The second look is absolutely not what I originally planned. I was working on an elaborate Dolly Parton inspired dress, but it was just not working out and I needed to finish this look by the end of the fall semester. So I decided to pivot for the sake of my mental health. I evaluated the fabric I had and my planned designs and came up with a totally new blouse and dress that I designed and made in less than 2 weeks. I'm crazy. This look is still very Dolly inspired, but from a different specific reference than my original planned look. I love the sleeves on the screen dress and the shades of pink she wore a lot in the 70s, and I pulled that into my look in the general collection. The dress fabric is a thick dead stock cotton tweed, and the blouse was made from a stretch silk chiffon. And yes, all of my designs include pockets. These first two looks are softer, representing my interpretation of my personal femininity. The next two looks are harder and represent the more masculine side of my gender expression. I fell in love with jumpsuits during my time at UNCG, and I really wanted to design one of my own. I just love how they can be so over the top and extra, while also being very comfortable and functional when you need to get stuff done. That vibe really makes me feel gender euphoria and how I ideally like to represent my non-binary identity. One of my goals for this collection was for most of my looks to be somewhat adjustable in size. So the back of the jumpsuit is elasticated for a comfortable fit, which was also the same case as my shorts from earlier. I worked in a lot of Western details with the yokes and the piping. The lack of pockets on women's clothing drives me to put as many pockets as I can on my designs. This look originally had 6 pockets, 2 on the pant fronts, 2 on the butt, and 2 Western smile pockets on the chest. But I didn't like how the pocket bags laid against my chest, so I turned them into faux pockets instead, which is only acceptable when there are other functional pockets on the garment. I haven't made any polished technical art for this look yet, but here is my initial digital sketch. So I was sewing $10,000 suits for the Grand Ole Opry last summer, and it made me really want to make a suit for myself. I also fell in love with wearing suits during my time at UNCG, and I feel so powerful and so much like myself when wearing a colorful suit. My goal for this suit was for it to feel both feminine and masculine and to incorporate Western styling with my own twist on the aesthetic. I also wanted to feel a little oversized for comfort, yet fitted where I needed it to be for flattering sake, which I think I successfully achieved. I hand dyed all of the fabric, which is a selvage denim from Cullen Mills. I also made a cute little silk chiffon Western style scarf to tie the look together. The pants and contrast on the suit jacket were ice dyed in the same batch, and I also ice dyed the piping, silk for the scarf, and the rayon lining. There are 8 pockets total on the suit, 4 on the pants and 4 on the jacket. 2 of the jacket pockets are inside welt pockets. The jacket was a huge challenge for me, both in terms of pattern making and technical construction, because the drafting and sewing both involved a lot of advanced techniques. I made this before the jumpsuit, so this was my first time drafting pants and my first time drafting a collar with lapels. A lot of hand sewing goes into traditional tailoring, from inserting the lining and shoulder pads to pick stitching the lapels. I just really love pipe double welt pockets, which is a Western detail that is also hand finished with the arrow stitching that kind of tacks down the edges of the pockets. I also made covered buttons from my piping fabric to tie everything together. Kind of overkill on the sleeves, given that I designed this look to be worn with the sleeves rolled up to reveal the ice-dyed lining fabric, but I don't know how to half-ass things. Apologize for the language. But yeah, this collection is imperfect. I really challenged myself to try new things, to do hard things, and to make a lot of intricate things very quickly. I didn't have the time, experience, or budget to execute all of that perfectly, but imperfection is a requirement of learning. Who the heck designs and makes their first suit from scratch and nails it completely, 100%? Shooting my shot and landing at 95% is a feat that I am proud of, and I am proud of this collection for the journey it represents. It's not a super cohesive, commoditized collection from a corporate fashion brand, but is an organic, physical showcase of my creative process and my thirst for challenge. Thank you so much for your time. And also I'd like to thank my photographer, Sierra Kelly. I hope you all enjoyed my collection.
Thank you so much, Mary. Just one thing I wanted to say, Mary is actually the first student in the Artist in Residence program we've ever had from CARS. And so I was very excited to see her application last year, and she did a really great job. I hope she also listened to the song Silk Chiffon on repeat as you did all of your Silk Chiffon. And if you didn't, I'm going to be really disappointed. But anyway.
It was a lot of Shania Twain, to be honest.
Okay. All right. So our final presenter of the evening is Raven Sizemore. And Raven is going to talk about her project, Discovering Diversity in Music. Raven, you're.
All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Raven Sizemore, and over the past year, I have been working with my mentor, Dr. Randy Kohlenberg, on my project, Discovering Diversity in Music. The inspiration for this project really stems from my own experience as a female trombonist and the situations and belittlement that I have encountered because of that. This has led me to pursue the research of 3 successful women in music who represent diverse cultures and backgrounds. And these 3 women are Dr. Sherry Marcia Damon, Dr. Lorena Guillen, and Jana Mashini. Dr. Damon began her musical career in 5th grade on the clarinet. However, she quickly transitioned over to the trombone, and within 2 years as a 7th grader, she arranged her first piece with the help of her band director, and this would be the first of many successful arrangements for Dr. Damon. She remembers as early as high school experiencing discrimination within her musical field. Her band director would continue to take only male performers with him to competitions, despite Dr. Damon actually holding the first chair position. This led her to continue and finish her education at the North Carolina School of the Arts on a full ride scholarship. And it was also here that she realized her embouchure needed to be corrected. In order to do this, she actually had to revert back to only a 5-note range on her instrument. However, she absolutely persevered through this, and she went on to make history as the first woman to hold a position in the Navy Flute Band. She also has written one of the most cited dissertations during her time here at UNCG, titled "The Trombone in the Shout Band of the United House of Prayer for All People." This is a very private organization, and it has always been exclusively made up of males. However, Dr. Damon was able to receive special permission to not only record the band during their practice sessions and performances, but she also was able to perform with them in the all-male trombone section, which is amazing. From this experience, she was actually able to create the diagram you see to the left and the Western notated sheet music to the right. This was huge as the shout band relies very heavily on ear training, which is the transforming from hearing the music to putting it out on your instrument and playing it. So there's not many pieces of sheet music that exist for the shout band other than those included in her dissertation. Now I would like to share with you one of her arrangements titled "Ain't Got Time to Die." This is an African-American spiritual that I actually have had the chance to play here at UNCG with the trombone ensemble. Next is Dr. Lorena Guillen. She was born in Buenos Aires, Argentina, where her passion for music began. She remembers as a young girl getting to go to a major folk festival every summer with her father in Argentina. She also reminisces on the influence that her grandfather's tango and opera recordings had on her as a child that went on to influence her musical journey. She completed her vocal education in Argentina before traveling to the United States to further her studies. She has been here since 1994. She is a classically trained vocalist, a popular song interpreter, a tango scholar, as well as a successful music educator. The Lorena Guillen Tango Ensemble has had great success over the past year, and they have completed a number of projects that are very important to Dr. Guillen. One of which is the Other Side of My Heart project. For this project, Dr. Guillen conducted a series of interviews with 5 Latina immigrants, and they discussed and she questioned them about their journey to the US, specifically to North Carolina in the Triad region. Her husband, Alejandro Rudy, composed the music itself from it, and Dr. Guillen actually took the exact words from these interviews to form the lyrics for the 5 songs within this project. Today, I'm going to be sharing many ways of arriving.
We walked through the desert 3 days. My mom brought me at 12, and my brother only 9. My parents brought me here. I was 10 years old. They have a vision for their children, I suppose.
Next is Jana Mashini. Her musical career really took off at the age of 18 when she signed with a record label. However, she soon left this label as she felt they were trying to limit her as an artist. Since leaving that label, she has become a star. She is a 9-time NAMI winner, as well as a 2-time Grammy-nominated artist. As well as a vocalist, she is also a published author and has been featured on a number of films as a voice actor. The genre of her music really stays within the pop realm. However, she explores different styles as well as paying special attention to her Native American ancestry. She is of Lumbee and Tuscarora descent, and she expresses some of these ideals through not only her music, but also through her philanthropy work, which she does through Jana's Kids Foundation. Through this foundation, she offers scholarships and different opportunities to Native American and Aboriginal youth in hopes of affecting and influencing them in a positive way. During my research, I was able to read American Indian Story, The Adventures of Shakona, which is her published book. This book actually works directly with her album, American Indian Story. Each song off of the album goes directly with the chapter of the book. And Jana got the inspiration to produce this piece because of a vision of a young girl that came to her that she felt very closely resembled herself, but she said it was very obvious she was from thousands of years ago. And so through this book and also the album, she tells the story of Shakona, who she feels is an extension of herself in many ways. Today, I will be sharing with you a song from the album American Indian Story titled The Enlightened Time, which has won several awards at major film festivals.
Eagle soar on our faith and hope, knowing we stand strong together. We are all one tribe. Let this last forever. The enlightened time, living in the enlightened time.
In conclusion, this is only a very concise summary of the amazing work that these women have completed within their careers. They are great inspiration for not only me as a female trombonist and future music educator, but for all women musicians everywhere. The obstacles that they have overcome within their career and the perseverance that they have shown is inspiring for everyone. The reason this project was possible was because of just how personable and willing they are to work with people within the profession. I feel lucky to have been able to communicate directly with each one of these women, and I would love to take any questions. Thank you so much for your time.
All right, thank you so much, Raven. All right, if we would like to, at this moment in time, we could unmute and congratulate all of our presenters today. Just take a couple minutes to do so. Congratulations, everyone. It was a really great job.
Congratulations.
Okay.
We did it.
That's right. Absolutely. So if you want to, we can take a few minutes. If there are any questions that anyone has for the presenters, we can take a few of those before we call it an evening. Is there any questions that the audience might have for any of our presenters here that are still here? A few of them, as I said, had to leave. Yes, Dr. Muich.
I think I'm interested in hearing from, whoever wants to share what the experience of working on this for a full academic year has been. I mean, this is a long time to sustain a project and to keep working and keep moving forward, especially as, other obligations have cropped up. So I'm just curious to hear what any of you have to say about that process.
Fighting burnout was the big thing. Like, part of why I with my collection, I kind of pivoted in the aesthetic a little bit was to fight burnout. I was like, I am so tired of working with silk and this floofy BS. I want something friendly for this last part, which is why I did the rest of my collection in denim. So it was like, how do I make this feel cohesive while also pivoting enough that I don't feel burnt out?
I would just like to sort of piggyback off of that and say burnout is definitely a reality. And I think that one of the things that made it difficult for me is just I'm creating a longer written work than I had ever really tackled before. And so working on one story and one concept for so long really felt like it fried my brain for a little bit. So I had to sort of give myself a little bit of grace, and even work on some smaller relevant projects. That's where actually my cover design and bookbinding and things came in, to sort of give myself a break from the writing process so then I could come back to my work with, I guess, a fresher perspective.
Yeah, I made like 2 other things that weren't even part of this collection at the beginning of the semester, just to give my brain a break from pink ice dyed nonsense.
I would just say that my mentor and I really were able to tackle the project and get a lot done at the beginning, which gave me a lot of time to expand on the foundations that we laid. I would actually say that the hardest part about this has been trying to get my ideas together and fit it within the time constraints of this presentation, because we spend all year researching and we're so deep into our topics that we're passionate about. I've really enjoyed it though.
Any other questions for our artists in residence that are still with us on camera? I know it was a long time, but hey, we brought it in like almost right on time. So we are actually really good when it comes to that. I'm really proud of all of you. All right, well, I'm going to call it an evening for us. I'm so glad to have everybody that was here today being able to watch all the great projects that all of our artists and resident students were able to produce. And it was a very wonderful experience for me. And I'm glad to hear that it seemed like it was a wonderful experience for all of you. So good night, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Good night and thank you.
Night.
Good night. Thank you,
Congratulations.
everyone.
Thank you.